Good morning to those of you on the stream. Good morning to one and all. Welcome to Global Affairs Unfiltered. I'm Jack Stockwell, and we'll be here for an hour this morning. Have some music playing there in the background. K-Talk waiting for me to get on the air. K-Talk. Wow, what a week. What a week, and predictions for what's going to happen this week coming right up. I just need to wait till that music stops. Goes on entirely too long, but anyway. What a week, what a week. All right, sounds like I can get on there. All right, good morning to the K-Talk crew. Welcome to Global Affairs Unfiltered. I'm Jack Stockwell, the April 20th edition, this Monday morning, 2026. Do you remember what happened yesterday? About 251 years ago? April 19th, 1775, was the shot heard round the world as the British attempted to get their little renegade, ne'er-do-well American colony back under control. And to the shock of the arrogant British, the American colonists proved themselves well prepared, secured most of their military supplies out of harm's way, and successfully drove the British back to Boston. A little over a year later, the Declaration of Independence was signed in Philadelphia, and the War of Independence was officially launched. What do you suppose Samuel Adams, Paul Revere, Benjamin Franklin, George Washington would think of the spectacle that is going on in Washington, D.C. today? What would they say about the fact that the mighty King Charles and his royal consort, Queen Camilla, will be visiting their former colony in the coming days to celebrate the special relationship that exists between the United States and Great Britain over the last 2.5 centuries? And could George Washington ever have imagined that King Lear would be occupying the White House? So in an interview with Larry Johnson, one of my favorites to listen to on the internet, constitutional attorney Robert Barnes stated that everyone at the White House is aware of Trump's failing mental capacity. And he reported that the chief of staff, Susie Wiles, who was formerly a campaign manager for Bibi Netanyahu, I think you know that, has reversed her policy of preventing President Trump from hearing any bad news. That was the official policy that might detract him from his Israel first, America second position in the White House. Now she's reversed that position, and she's allowing cabinet members to now inform our president of the disastrous results of his policies in hopes to restrain him from unleashing an ongoing global catastrophe. Now, according to Barnes, this constitutional lawyer, even the pro-Zionist fanatics at the White House are well aware that the United States is not winning the Iran war, and that continuing along this path is going to end very badly. President Trump, of course, for his part, began Sunday morning, yesterday, April 19th, with another rabid Truth Social post threatening death and destruction on Iran if they refuse to accede to his completely delusional, illegal, and unreasonable demands. Despite that, he has announced that the American delegation was heading for Islamabad for more talks. Iran, on the other hand, if you've been watching this ping pong ball going back and forth, said they're not going anywhere for any delegation as long as the United States continues to blockade the strait. So the ceasefire, as you well know, officially ends tomorrow night around midnight or so. And with that having been said, don't forget that Russia, just the last few days, has issued very severe warnings to the Baltic states for allowing their airspace to be used for the launching of Ukrainian drones to attack Russia. Russia and China have to know that the targeting of Iran ultimately, of course, is directed at them. So in the last weeks, there has been a shift in the American political situation where Trump supporters are leaving in droves, not necessarily to support the Democratic Party. They're not changing party. They're denouncing Trump for breaking his campaign promises on not launching any new wars and for the economic hardship that they are beginning to suffer regardless of party membership as a result. And Trump's attack on Pope Leo XIV have cost him the support of many American Catholics, which he would not have won the election without. And AIPAC is beginning to lose its grip on the U.S. Congress, as evidenced by the closeness of the vote on invoking the War Powers Resolution, which comes up here pretty soon, not too much further. The time runs out on Trump being able to do what he wants. And now, 250 years after the Declaration of Independence, who's going to liberate America from the British Zionist Epstein class that has our country by the throat? Now, in the way of news updates, according to the U.S. Central Command press release, the guided missile destroyer USS Spruance warned the Iranian-flagged cargo ship Tuska not to attempt to enter an Iranian port. And after 6 hours, the Americans launched missiles, which struck the engine room of the cargo ship. And then the U.S. Marines from the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit later boarded the non-compliant vessel, which remains in American custody. Thank you, Bruce. I like that. By the rude bridge which arched the flood, their flags to April's breeze unfurled. Here once the embattled farmers stood and fired the shot heard round the world. Beautiful. So here we have an American guided missile destroyer warning an Iranian flagged cargo ship not to enter an Iranian port. After 6 hours of you better not, you better not, the Americans launched missiles which struck the engine room of an Iranian cargo ship. Is that an act of war? Which is kind of silly to ask at this point because, yeah, we're already at war. But then they boarded this non-compliant vessel, which is currently in U.S. custody. Where do I get that news? Because I've often been accused of not knowing what I'm talking about. That's from U.S. Central Command's press release. You can go read it for yourself. So the Wall Street Journal reported last night that the United States is preparing to operationally expand the blockade of Iranian ports. Now, on Saturday, the U.S. Central Command reported that so far since last Monday, April 13th, some 23 ships that had departed Iranian reports have been turned back. And according to the Journal report, the U.S. military is preparing in coming days to board Iran-linked oil tankers and seize commercial ships out in international waters. Isn't this the very same thing that Jefferson sent American Navy to Morocco to stop the pirates from boarding American ships? According to the Wall Street Journal, the U.S. military has every intention of seizing, not just stopping, but seizing these ships. Now, the Trump administration's decision to step up the economic pressure on Tehran is intended, as the journal says, to force the regime to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and make concessions on its nuclear program, which of course has been the focus of negotiations between the U.S. and Iran. And because Iran's not going to do that, the whole idea of continuing the Islamabad talks was absolutely silly. But remember, the strait was open on February 28th, before the president began his attack on Iran. And Iran produced its 60% enriched uranium solely in response to Trump taking the U.S. out of the 2015 nuclear agreement and imposing maximum pressure and economic sanctions on Iran. So in other words, Trump, through his war, his blockade, his sanctions, and other coercive measures, is trying to force Iran to undo what it did in response to what Trump did by policy choices back in 2015. So further tightening these screws, it's unlikely to have the effects that Trump says he desires, because according to the New York Times, the U.S.-Israeli war has significantly damaged Iran's leadership structure, their larger naval vessels and missile production facilities, but has done little to restrict Iran's ability to control the strait. And Iran could thus emerge from the conflict with a blueprint that will keep its adversaries at bay, of course, regardless of any restrictions on its nuclear program. And it's so silly to continue to say, as Hegseth does, we've destroyed their navy. Iran doesn't have a navy. They never really had a navy. If you look at the map, and I just put the radio station on mute. Apparently something is playing, so I'll talk to you streamers. If you look at the map of the Persian Gulf, I got a little too close to my cat this morning, and she's got me sneezing. They don't need a navy to control. They don't need a. If you look at the very high cliffs, the mountainous edge on the east side of the strait, where they have hidden on trucks missiles designed to hit ships there at the strait, they don't need a navy. But everyone now knows that there is a conflict in the future, because closing the strait is going to be the first thing in the Iranian textbook. Danny Sarinowitz, who's the former head of the Iran branch of Israel's military intelligence agency, now a fellow at the Atlantic Council, said very interestingly that you cannot beat geography. No kidding. That's just what I was talking about during the break at K-Talk. You can't beat geography. He says that what's been known since at least 1988, when Iran briefly closed the strait by laying mines. And even the prospect of sea mines is enough to scare off commercial shipping. Because all you have to do is cripple one of these boats, and what's Lloyd's of London going to do? They will stop insuring the ships. And nobody is going to send a $1, $5, $10 million ship with that much oil. The ships, of course, probably cost more than that. But something that's carrying $10 million worth of oil in it, or is it $100 million? I don't know. No one's going to insure it if they know that Iran is sitting there with one missile aimed at the engine department of the ship, not to sink the ship, because they don't want oil in the Gulf, but they'll cripple the ship so it can't go anywhere. So even the prospect of sea mines is enough to scare off the commercial shipping. And Iran retains more precise means of control because of the attack drones and the short-range missiles that the New York Times is talking about. So the American military and intelligence officials are estimating that after weeks of war, Iran still has at least 40% of its attack drones and 60% of its missile launchers. More than enough to hold the shipping in the Strait of Hormuz hostage for the near future. Now, it's not clear how the truce between Washington and Tehran is going to play out, but one thing is certain: Iran has tested its nuclear weapons. Let me say that again. Iran has tested. Now, I'm quoting this is Dmitry Medvedev, the former president of Russia and deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council. He said, you don't have to worry about Iran having nuclear weapons. They've already got one, and it's called the Strait of Hormuz. And he says its potential is inexhaustible. And with that, coupled with the Houthis' threat of closing the other strait coming down out of the Red Sea, there are a number of countries where commerce will completely come to an end. What will happen here? Well, since we depend so much on other countries, we're going to have some problems. The Iran Daily News, which has an English translation, posted the following on X yesterday morning. According to Tasman News Agency, message exchanges between Iran and the U.S. via Pakistani intermediary have continued in recent days following the conclusion of the first round of negotiations. The Iranian team has made clear, as long as Trump's naval blockade declaration remains in place, there will be no negotiations. That was said yesterday morning, representing the position of the Iranian government, and tomorrow night at midnight, the 10-day ceasefire ends. Oh, what an interesting week this is going to turn out to be. Now, yesterday morning at 8:10 a.m. Eastern Time, President Trump took to Truth Social to issue more threats to Iran, including this, quote, knock out every single power plant and every single bridge if the Iranians don't accede. Now, Colonel Douglas Macgregor, who I wish was the Secretary of Defense, in a dialogue with Danny Davis, asserts that the intelligent thing for President Donald Trump to do would be to simply end the war as America is losing it. And there is nothing to be gained for the United States to prolong it. He says that President Trump is unable to do that because he adheres to the Roy Cohn style of diplomacy, which, if you've heard Colonel Macgregor over the last few days, as I have a couple of times on different shows, talking about the one person who had a much greater influence in the upbringing and training of Donald Trump than his own father, was Roy Cohn. And he said one of the rules that Trump learned from this was to never admit anything, never admit defeat. Say you were successful even when you weren't. Say that you're in charge when you're not. In other words, never ever behave truthfully towards anybody, because if you admit defeat in any way, shape, or form, if you admit that you were unable to accomplish something, the rest of the world will destroy you. Macgregor says that's the president's philosophy. So as of this morning, Trump's claiming in his post that the talks are going ahead, that the American delegation is en route, but the Iranian delegation is refusing to participate as long as Trump's naval blockade stands, fits right in with what he talked about with Roy Cohn. Now, you remember the last time they had a little meeting in Islamabad, and it's interesting that I can't find anything positive from the Pakistani group that they were ever in favor of that in the first place. However, There were several times when Vice President Vance, and what was he doing there? It should have been Marco Rubio. But there are several times when Vice President Vance was asked a simple yes or no question. He begged their pardon to leave the room to go make a phone call. And as the press releases have come forth on the subject, it has been very clear that it was Netanyahu that he was talking to. One other little aside I wanted to mention here, along with what is going on with President Trump and his, what do you want to call it, his mental condition, and the growing feud that he has with Pope Leo XIV. The U.S. Trump, the Trump administration has ended more than 60 years of federal partnership with the Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Miami. The Federal Office of Refugee Reassignment notified the charity at the end of last month of the termination of a $1 million contract to house and resettle thousands of unaccompanied migrant children, as first reported April 15th last week in the Miami Herald. And essentially, the charity ran a federally funded foster care system comparable to those that are run by state agencies. And the Catholic Charities program has been recognized for its excellence in serving as a model for other agencies throughout our country. And the charity had become a trusted federal partner in 1960 when the charity was called upon to help the U.S. State Department's Operation Pedro Pan, where Catholic charities were asked to give temporary housing and resettle 7,000 of the 14,000 Cuban children who entered the U.S. between 1960 and 1964. My goodness, they'd be my age now. And among the alumni of the Cuban Children's Program is the former U.S. Senator, Mel Martinez. That's been canceled. Now, entered an interview with former CIA analyst Larry Johnson, another collaborator as a part of the Napolitano podcast series, who I listen to quite a bit. This Robert Barnes that I was referring to earlier asserts that everyone around the president is aware that he is clueless and delusional and has less rationality than a 3-year-old child. Barnes further is reporting that White House Chief of Staff, as I said, Susie Wiles, has changed her policy because up till now, you couldn't give President Trump bad news. You could only give him good news. And I don't know of anybody who could give him good news better than Pete Hegseth. Talk about a rah-rah cheerleader in your back pocket. And so what she has done, as I mentioned in my opening comments, reverse that policy where now you can tell the president the truth with the idea hoping that some reality might actually filter through the Oval Office. However, according to Barnes, he further reports that everyone around Trump is also too cowardly to confront and contain him. And therefore, as a result, President Trump is still too much in charge. Barnes repeated what other analysts have said, that President Trump personally sabotaged Vice President Vance's efforts at the last round of negotiations in Islamabad by insisting that Vance consult with Israeli war criminal Bibi Netanyahu. Put yourself in Vance's position. I don't know if he was prepared to be vice president in the first place. I think he could use a little bit more political experience. However, when the president says, and this is the gist of it, if you have questions, call Bibi. So Barnes also reports that Vance had given up the idea of running for president. Did you know that? He's not going to run for president because he knows that this administration is catastrophic. And anybody associated with this administration right now is going down in flames, as we will witness in the midterms. He says that Rubio knows a prolonged Iran plan will be detrimental to his administration possibilities. So he is also trying to do what he can to get the war to end. Now, Barnes reports that Melania Trump's very bizarre Jeffrey Epstein press conference was not done in consultation with her husband or others at the White House, but she's unhappy with her husband's demeanor and his fits of rage. He said that Melania is aware of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein testifying before Congress now, and people like Howard Lutnick could be in grave trouble. Barnes made no mention of the Zampoli connection and possible upcoming revelations that can, in fact, hurt the First Lady herself. So, according to Barnes, high-ranking military officials had been contemplating refusing to obey President Trump's orders pertaining to the annihilation of Iran. Barnes made the point that they should consider that President Trump will not give out enough pardons to cover all the military personnel who will be committing war crimes if they don't obey him. And then on the midterm elections, Barnes said that everyone is aware that the Democrats are going to make massive gains in both the House and the Senate, particularly the longer this war continues. So you don't hear much from Schumer, do you? You don't hear much from the House. They're just kind of sitting back under, a shade tree in their chaise lounge, sipping their mint juleps, waiting for the self-imposed suicide of the Republican Party to take place. Even though they have voted for the president essentially to do what he's doing. Now that they're screaming about the War Powers Act, which comes up here before too long, they might start making some anti-administration positions. Barnes also thinks that Congress is going to balk at providing more funding for the war. Barnes and Johnson seem to agree that ending this war depends on whether Vice President Vance can finesse an agreement between the United States and Iran to be something that President Trump can then claim as a victory. They don't speculate on how catastrophic the result will be if the vice president is unable to pull something off. Given President Trump's driven rage and the cowardice of the people surrounding him and their refusal to tell him the truth. Now, I wanted to say something about the shot heard around the world. Just incredible American history. On April 19th, 1775, the American Revolutionary War officially began with the battles of Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. There had already been, as you well remember, several years from your education, several years of friction going on between the American colonies and England, and negotiations to reconcile the two sides constantly failed. So in February 1775, the British Parliament had declared the colony of Massachusetts to be in a state of rebellion. So on April 14th, General Thomas Gage had received orders to put down the rebels, and subsequently sent orders to Lieutenant Colonel Smith of the 10th Regiment, march with a corps of grenadiers and light infantry, put under your command with the utmost expedition and secrecy to Concord, where you will seize and destroy all artillery, ammunition, provisions, tents, small arms, and all military stores, whatever. Now, all of us in our American history classes, remember that that's what the whole idea at Lexington and Concord were for the British to grab the guns. Well, I'm just quoting from the historical record what Gage actually said to Smith. March with a corps of grenadiers and light infantry put under your command with the utmost expedition and secrecy to Concord. Where utmost secrecy? They didn't have smartphones. They didn't have videos. They didn't have YouTube. They didn't have the stream. They just had horseback riders. Where you will seize and destroy all artillery, ammunition, provisions, tents, small arms, and all military stores, whatever, end quote. 700 British soldiers marched to Concord on the night of April 18th, but Paul Revere was deployed by American patriots Sam Adams and John Hancock to ride to Concord and Lexington to warn the local militia to prepare for battle. Paul Revere was joined by two other riders that night, William Dawes and Dr. Samuel Prescott, who took slightly different routes to spread the word. Prescott was the only one of the three to actually reach Concord. Now, this is from the Gilder Lehrman Institute. Quote, warned of the British troops of movements, the Lexington Patriots had assembled in an effort to halt British progress toward Concord. Both sides stood their ground, and in a tense moment, a shot was fired. Though it's unclear which side, British soldier or American patriot, fired the first shot heard round the world. History remembers it as the start of the American Revolutionary War. Continuing. Sending these orders to Captain John Currier on the day of the battles, Patriot Colonel Isaac Merrill wrote that after the engagement at Lexington, which left 8 Americans dead, the British troops thence proceed to Concord, killing and destroying our men and interest. He then ordered Currier to mobilize and muster as many under your officers and soldiers as you can possibly to meet immediately at some suitable place, and then to march forthwith to Concord, or else, whereas is your discretion, you shall think best to the relief of our friends and country. By the end of April 19th, the British had suffered 273 casualties, and the Americans 93. Continuing the quote, Americans immediately understood the momentous significance of the battles of Lexington and Concord. Ezekiel Russell, a Salem, Massachusetts printer, quickly produced this broadside entitled Bloody Butchery by the British Troops, which detailed the battles of the American casualties. Recognizing their historic weight of the day, Russell's broadside urged a perpetual memorial of that important event, on which perhaps may depend the future freedom and greatness of the Commonwealth of America. Wow. Here, yesterday, the 250th anniversary of that battle. Kind of grabs you a little bit, doesn't it? All right, a little bit on Netanyahu, a review of the Israeli press, and thank goodness most of the Israeli press has English copies, English editions, and as you go through, and they're all online, you can read them yourself. A review of the press and several sources report a near unanimous assessment of the reaction of Israel's prime minister and his immediate circle to the current situation around the ceasefire in Southwest Asia. And there's general agreement that Netanyahu failed to achieve any of his major objectives, which were of course regime change in Iran, They didn't change any regime. In fact, they've kind of emboldened the previous one. Destruction of Iran's military, which has not happened. The dismantling of Hamas and Hezbollah, which has not happened. And there are reports on, as late as yesterday, that the IDF is conducting a Gaza-style assault in several areas of southern Lebanon, including destroying homes and schools and tearing up roads, and they expect this to continue. You saw where last week the IDF took out a middle school, just totally destroyed a middle school in South Lebanon. And while Netanyahu continues to publicly tout his great and productive friendship with our president, he's seething about Trump's order to shut down the attacks on Lebanon. This back and forth ping pong argument. Well, the ceasefire included Lebanon. No, it did. Yes, it did. No, it didn't. Yes, it did. So it's expected that the ceasefire will end without any further commitment to end the fighting. And the IDF is using the ceasefire to reload, of course, for a blitz, which would include actions in Syria and even Turkey. This is Israeli press. So with word coming out, and remember, Turkey is no fan of Netanyahu or Israel. So with word coming out late yesterday that Iran may not agree to a follow-up session of the negotiations in Pakistan, there are provocations being prepared that would justify a renewal of the fighting. So reports that the United States is threatening to board Iran-linked ships was taken as a sign that the fighting is going to continue right away. And the IDF officials are said to be concerned that Netanyahu is preparing a major attack on the IDF leadership, so he can get the blame for the failures of all of this placed on the IDF leadership for being totally unprepared for that attack back on October 7th in 2023. And also for the change of strategy that led to its failure. So an article in Haaretz claimed that Netanyahu used the October 7th attack to move away from the traditional strategy of Israel's military of relying on deterrence and sharp, swift, devastating attacks to punish the enemy, to a strategy of genocide to force the acceptance of ethnic cleansing. This is a major Israeli newspaper. Now, I know Haaretz is far left, communist, if you will. But this is being published under the freedom of press in Israel this weekend. That Netanyahu used October 7th as an excuse to move away from its traditional defensive posturing against Hezbollah and Hamas to one of ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Gazan residents, the Palestinians. The model of this, of course, was the removal of the PLO from Lebanon in 1982. And they believe the murder of Hamas leaders and the mass killing in Gaza, the assassination of Nasrallah and senior Hezbollah leaders in Lebanon, would break the spirit of resistance, enabling the transfer of the bulk of the remaining population to occur. So was this failure rooted in mistaken intelligence assessments regarding the enemy's resilience, a failed strategy, or some unrealistic estimation of Israel's military strength? So with an election coming up in Israel, who's going to take the blame? Because whatever the ultimate conclusion is, the idea that Israel's dependence of being a new Sparta, capable of miraculous military victories with the aid of the United States, has taken a very big blow, and the popular and widely accepted belief that Israel is and was and will continue to be the safest place in the world for Jews has been definitely shattered by the last few weeks, as Israelis have been forced to run to bomb shelters 2, 3, sometimes as many as 4 times a day. And as Colonel McGregor said, this could end simply by President Trump saying, all right, get out of the pool. The game's over. But that's not his Roy Cohn training. All right, in case you missed it, I was able to put together here some information that's going to be uncomfortable to listen to. Because it's what President Trump was sending out Friday morning. And for the benefit of those who do not follow President Trump's Truth Social account, I have here verbatim President Trump's posts starting at 8:19 a.m. on Friday. And I want you to be honest here for a second. Why would you consider anyone doing this, saying these things as being normal, let alone befitting the President of the United States of America? And if you want to get a sense of how the president is being manipulated, just listen to this first post, in which he refers to a clearly lying broadcast claiming that Tucker Carlson is going down in flames while Trump's support is only growing. Nothing could be further from the truth. And much more could be said about the other posts, including the question as to whether Iran has agreed to any of what President Trump is claiming. But here it is. At 8:12 a.m., this is Friday morning, quote, "It's easy. Tucker is a low IQ person, always easy to beat and highly overrated. So are Megyn Kelly and Candace, really dumb and mentally ill, and bankrupt Alex Jones, who's completely fried. There are others also. And then we have some that are very good, true MAGA all the way, and smart. I should do a list of good, bad, somewhere in the middle. Wouldn't that be fascinating?" President DJT. Then an hour later, on Truth Social, he posted this. "Iran has just announced that the Strait of Iran is fully open and ready for full passage. Thank you." 20 minutes later, he said this. "The Strait of Hormuz is completely open and ready for business and full passage, but the naval blockade will remain in full force, in effect as it pertains to Iran, only until such time as our transactions with Iran are 100% complete. This process should go very quickly in that most of the points are already negotiated. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump." Then 30 minutes later, he posted this. "The USA will get all nuclear dust created by our great B-2 bombers. No money will exchange hands in any way, shape, or form. This deal is in no way subject to Lebanon either. But the USA will separately work with Lebanon and deal with the Hezbollah, not Hezbollah, Hezbollah situation in an appropriate manner. Israel will not be bombing Lebanon any longer. They are prohibited from doing so by the USA. Enough is enough. Thank you, President DJT. Well, prohibiting Netanyahu from doing something is like prohibiting rainfall in the midst of a hurricane. 10:13 a.m., 2 hours after this stuff started. Now the Hormuz situation is over. I received a call from NATO asking if we could use some help. I told them to stay away, unless they just want to load up their ships with oil. They're useless when needed. A paper tiger. President DJT. 7 minutes later, Iran, with the help of the USA, has removed or is removing all the sea mines. Thank you, President DJT. 7 minutes later, again, the deal is not tied in any way to Lebanon, but we will make Lebanon great again. This isn't easy for me to do this. And I'm going to lose some friends over this. I may lose some listeners to my morning show over this. But you've got to hear this. This is what's coming out of the Oval Office. I'm not happy about this. Another 3 minutes later. Thank you to Pakistan and its great Prime Minister and Field Marshal. Two fantastic people, President Donald J. Trump. 3 minutes later. A great and brilliant day for the world. 7 minutes later. Iran has agreed to never close the Strait of Hormuz again. It will no longer be used as a weapon against the world. President Donald J. Trump. Remember, he's looking for an out here. He's looking for what they call an off-ramp, so he can declare victory and come home. Just as there are now 3 aircraft carriers in the area and 50,000 U.S. troops, most of which are logistical support people, not gunners, not people with guns. 18 minutes later, the failing New York Times, the fake news CNN, and others just don't know what to do. They're desperately looking for a reason to criticize President Trump on the Iran situation. Well, they just can't find it. Why don't you just say at the right time, job well done, Mr. President, so they can start to get back some of their credibility? I voted for him. I'm proud of the fact that I voted for him under the conditions which I voted for. To end all wars and not start any new wars. To do something about the economy. To end the war in Ukraine. To end the war in Gaza. Other than making the border more secure, I'm trying to find one of his promises that he kept. And like I said, this is not fun. But in a series of tweets that he announced the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, there's a lot more stuff I could go into here, but we're kind of running out of time. Boy, that hour went by fast. But while Trump is touting the reopening of the strait as a great victory for himself, Italian Foreign Minister Grassi tied it very closely to the ceasefire that began hours earlier in Lebanon with the Lebanese ceasefire. Grassi said this: in line with the ceasefire in Lebanon, the passage for all commercial vessels is declared completely open for the remaining period of ceasefire on the coordinated route as already announced by Ports and Maritime Organization of the Islamic Republic of Iran that they posted on X. Then later, an informed source clarified to Tasnim, their news agency, that the opening of the strait is subject to 3 conditions set by Iran. The ships must be commercial and the passage of military ships prohibited. And neither the ships nor the cargo should be related to the hostile countries. Vessels must pass through the route designated by Iran. And if you've noticed it, I've seen it on a map, it comes very, very close, even though it's in deep water, very close to the edge, the western edge of Iran, making it very close to anti-ship missiles. And number three, the passage of ships must be coordinated with the Iranian forces responsible for the passage. As CENTCOM had before the war, confirmed the management of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard over the Strait of Hormuz. Well, there you have it. The current state of affairs. I'm going to get in probably more tomorrow on where Russia and China is in all of this, because that's important. Because Putin just issued very dire warnings to Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania. You do not let your land be airway passages for the drones that are being launched into Russia. And Putin is kind of up against a wall with his own people, because his people are getting sick and tired of getting spanked like this without doing something about it. And the word on the street that I've seen is that Russia is simply going to gas up the trucks and head right to the Dnieper, take Odessa, and march towards Kyiv. But more on that tomorrow. My half-off special is still going on. I think it's full today, but there may be an opening tomorrow. 801-523-1890. And I'm seeing a lot of people with just decades of pain that they haven't been able to get out of already beginning to get relief. 801-523-1890. And I'm expecting any minute here for the news to show up at K-Talk and move to the next hour of broadcast. Again, I treasure the time and the trust that's given to me to be a part of the morning program, the weekly lineup at K-Talk. I know there's a lot of good hosts. I count myself lucky to be among them. I do a lot of research. I wish I had the time and the effort and the support from a support staff. I am my support staff that some of these other podcasters have. To line up really good guests and everything else for you, besides Harley. But once again, as I sound like I'm stalling here, I am. I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. Thank you for being a part of that today, guys. And then